This video explores Brown versus Board of Education, a landmark Supreme Court case and the complex fight for its implementation, centered on the phrase, all deliberate speed. The 1896 Plessy versus Ferguson decision established the separate but equal doctrine, forming the legal basis for decades of Jim Crow segregation, including in schools. Linda Brown, denied admission to an all-white school, challenged this 58-year-old precedent. The unanimous May 17, 1954, decision in Brown versus Board of Education found that separate educational facilities are inherently unequal. The court concluded that segregation generates a feeling of inferiority, violating the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. The Brown 1 ruling was hailed as a historic blow against segregation, captured in political cartoons depicting the decision as shattering the chains of segregation and exploding the system. The 1954 decision did not specify how or when desegregation was to be implemented. Recognizing the complexity, the Supreme Court heard further arguments, leading to Brown 2 in 1955. This delay created a new legal challenge. The debate over implementation centered on two opposing terms: forthwith, advocated by the NAACP for immediate action, and deliberate, which the court favored for a more gradual and careful approach. The crucial phrase, with all deliberate speed, originated from Justice Felix Frankfurter's edit to an early draft of the Brown 2 decree, replacing the word forthwith to allow for flexibility. The ambiguous language of with all deliberate speed in Brown 2 became a legal loophole. Opponents of integration seized upon it to engage in years of massive resistance, inaction, and token compliance. Prince Edward County, Virginia, chose to close its entire public school system in 1959 rather than comply with desegregation. This 1963 letter from the NAACP pleads with President Kennedy for federal intervention 9 years after the initial ruling. Years of delay forced courts to intervene again to define desegregation's substance. This timeline shows key post-Brown decisions, shifting the fight to complex issues like implementation plans and integrated school system meanings. In Green versus County School Board, 1968, the court struck down freedom of choice plans, demanding schools eliminate segregation root and branch. Swan versus Charlotte-Mecklenburg, 1971, approved busing as a necessary tool to achieve racial balance. Keyes versus School District No. 1, 1973, addressed de facto segregation outside the South. Milliken versus Bradley, 1974, a major setback, blocked inter-district desegregation, effectively isolating racially concentrated city school districts. Segregation mandated by law de jure is dead. However, de facto segregation or segregation in practice persists, often resulting from segregated housing patterns that are much harder to address following the Milliken decision. Brown versus Board of Education was a monumental victory. Yet, the story of its implementation, particularly the choice of all deliberate speed, demonstrates that the fight for true equality in American education remains slow, contested, and ongoing. This video has explored how legalized segregation was embedded in U.S. law and why the court's unanimous decision marked a turning point in constitutional interpretation and civil rights. How did Brown versus Board of Education challenge the long-standing doctrine of separate but equal? And why was overturning Plessy versus Ferguson such a revolutionary moment in American history? Despite the ruling, many schools remain racially and economically segregated, raising questions about how fully Brown's promise has been realized. In what ways did the Brown decision reshape public education in the United States? And why do debates over school equality and segregation still persist today? The decision energized civil rights activism, encouraged legal challenges to segregation, and laid the groundwork for later milestones like the Civil Rights Act of 1964. How did Brown versus Board of Education influence the broader civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s? Massive resistance, school closures, and delayed integration echo current debates over court rulings, states' rights, and social change. What resistance did the Brown decision face at the local and state levels? And how does that resistance mirror modern conflicts over civil rights and federal authority? How does this case remain a legal and moral reference point in debates over equity, affirmative action, and systemic inequality? How does Brown v. Board of Education continue to shape Supreme Court decisions and public discussions about equality, opportunity, and the role of education in a democracy?